Monday, March 10th at 4:31, and I call this meeting of the Clear Creek Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present and that this meeting has been duly called and that its notice has been posted in accordance with Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. And we do not have any community input this afternoon, and so we will move to our next agenda item, which is our consent agenda. And I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Rowan?
I move adoption of the consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, all those in favor, if you raise your right hand. That passes unanimous. Thank you. And we'll move to item B.
So we are going to look at considering approval of use of capital project funds for facility-related projects. And the capital and contingency funds were approved back in November of 24 to complete the new culinary arts space at the Learner Support Center. And due to several factors, additional project funds are needed to complete this project. So Mr. Miller provided a pretty extensive update in the Friday packet, which he will summarize and then answer any questions that you have before we approve that item. Thank you,
Dr. Engel. So as she mentioned, we did approve $2.5 million out of capital and contingency for this project back in November. We opened proposals in February with the hopes of awarding it in February, but based on the numbers that came back, we paused that, and our team, Alex and JT and the facilities team, got busy working with PBK Architects, working with Dana Morgan and her team, really trying to figure out how we could make sure that we could complete the work as we had originally presented that information, minimizing any impacts on cost reduction strategies that would have on the campus and the students that would participate. So they worked hard through that process. They did identify, originally there was a total project budget was over by about 1.8 million based on their work and Dana Morgan and her team funding about $100,000 of equipment out of the Perkins grant and some various other things. PBK Architects also offered to donate their fee to make sure that the project could get completed based on some of the other estimating problems that we had during November when we presented that information. So through all of those efforts, we were able to reduce the needed funds to $646,500. We're proposing that we approve the use of Bond 17 savings and interest rather than capital and contingency to make sure we could complete this work. For all intents and purposes, the students and staff would not really notice the changes that we made. Primarily, they were related to MEP. And we were able to really tighten up the design, make sure that we made sure it would work and be appropriate for that space, and ensure that we maintain the design elements that we had presented back in November. So we are requesting that the board approve additional capital projects funds of $646,500 for the Clear Lake High School culinary arts renovation.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Any questions from the board? Mr. Rowan?
This is just my inexperience here. What does MEP stand for? Mechanical,
Electrical, and Plumbing.
Okay. I figured it was something, based on context, I figured it was something like that. So is there any concern at all that if we reduce what we're doing there, it might cause maintainability problems in the future?
No, some of the changes that we made related to the plumbing, which was our biggest concern, we are just abandoning in place and filling it with grout and running new lines, which significantly reduced the amount of trenching and saw cutting we were required to do. Another big chunk of that was the mechanical work related to the exhaust hoods in the new lab. Based on the existing mechanical systems and ability for those systems to maintain balanced air in there. The engineers had thought they needed to add additional air into the space. Well, that created 3 rooftop units with associated infrastructure. That was a pretty big dollar amount that we were able to remove by going to what we typically do in our school kitchens. We're utilizing existing air systems and just doing a balanced exhaust hood that allows all those fumes to go out.
Okay, so the original plan was to take out all the plumbing, and now we're just going to leave it in place decommissioned?
Not all of it, but the ones identified to be removed and replaced, we ran them to new sinks, new floor drains, all of those things. With JT and Alex worked through that and how we might be more efficient with that. And then abandoning it in place is not typically how we would do it, but we can fill them with grout so that we don't have any structural issues with the foundation by
Okay.
leaving those empty pipes under there.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Full. Any other comments or questions from you?
I just wanted to comment. I'm thankful to PBK for waiving their fees. It just goes to show that the relationship we've developed over the years, and I know before I've gotten on the board, that we've used them for our projects and everything. So if you talk to them, please thank them for doing that. And also just wanted to recognize Alex and JT for the extra work that they've had to do. I always wondered when I walk into the LSC what's behind that paneling and that wall. And I guess now we know, as they say, and these are things that you run across when you're having to do a deep dive and digging into, okay, if we demolish this, what's behind there and how are we gonna, tie in existing systems. So thank them as well for the job that they did.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Any other comments or questions from the board?
No, I thought I misheard extensive, and I replaced it in my head with expensive. So
That's the same word.
that's what I.
It's both.
He said that's the same.
Anyway,
And I'll just say that I'm excited because once again, it's bringing fidelity to the east side of the district and providing an opportunity for, our kids that can't necessarily participate in culinary arts over at Springs. So bringing that to them, and then also, as long as nothing's impacted, I know we've talked about future plans for that to be a catering site and things of that nature. So, I'm still excited and I'm still thankful that we're able to do that for our students over there.
We were able to maintain that partnership between Child Nutrition and Culinary Arts to make sure that we would be able to, all of the original plans we had discussed about that collaboration and working with our catering department is all part of the design still. We didn't modify any of that or upset that part of the project. I did understand that we've got 60 that have already signed up for next fall, with another sizable group of kids waiting to get approved for that. So it's definitely going to be a success once we get that rolled out. We're on round 2 of comments with the City of Houston. So as soon as we can get that permit, we will start working.
Thank you. Thanks. Any other comments from the board? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President,
Mr. Truck?
I move to approve the recommendation of superintendent to approve the use of capital project funds of $646,500 for facility-related projects.
Thank you, Mr. Truck. Any other comments from the board? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your right hand. That passes unanimous. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Miller. We'll move to our next item. Tied.
Yeah, that's
Directly
Mr.
to
Miller,
this?
just a
Mr. Miller?
recommendation of the awarding of the contract.
Okay.
Right. As we mentioned, we did open proposals for this project back in February. The apparent the apparent best value was Generosity Services, which is a company we've worked with for many years. They also were a big part of that cost reduction meetings and evaluations to make sure that we could bring this project in. So we are recommending, the superintendent is recommending that we approve the construction contract 2025.412 to Generosity Services in the amount of $2,684,500 for the Clear Lake High School Culinary Arts Project.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any other comments or questions from the board? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. President, I move that we approve construction contract 2025.412 to Generosity Services in the amount of $2,684,500 for the Clear Lake High Culinary Arts Project.
Thank you, Mr. McCott. Any other comments? from the board? Seeing none, all those in favor, raise your right hand. That passes unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And we'll move to our next items for information and discussion, and we're doing just a slight order change. We're going to look at cadence of accountability first.
Thank you, Mr. President. So our cadence of accountability establishes a structured ongoing process for monitoring, evaluating, and improving educational outcomes by ensuring learning systems work together to guarantee that all students receive a world-class education. Dr. Henley will share data from the 2024-25 CCISD Performance Survey addressing 3 district goals. And these metrics will look at goal 1.1, teacher satisfaction and student behavior support, goal 2.5, increasing the perception of quality education, and goal 3.4, implementation of a unified communication platform for families and employees. And I believe you have a copy of the presentation too in front of you. Thank you.
All right, so thank you for letting me present this information today. We're going to go a little bit out of order because why not? We're going to start with the first goal of just overall metrics of the survey. This was sent out at the middle of January. We closed it February 3rd. We had a little over 4,000 responses from our total between parents and our staff, and you can see the breakdown between elementary, intermediate, high school. It looks like elementary parents were our number one voice this year. So one of the district goals was to increase that perception of quality education. This was to have the parents feel. We wanted to raise it from 87%, which was last year's metric, to 90%. When you take in all of the respondents, we were at 89.3%. We're really close, but it is growth from last year's goal and the work that has been happening. So then when we look at it, you can tell that parents and guardians from elementary schools were 92%, and our staff was at 90% for elementary, and then the breakdown for intermediate and high school. So we have an opportunity to work a little bit with the high school parents to just change that perception and grow from there. So the second goal was really to increase that teacher satisfaction and that student behavior support is measured. So really what was happening and what support were they having for students with behavior. We asked that question and 82% strongly agree with 18% disagree. And then the last goal, which was to implement a unified communication platform for families and staff. This is a new measure. This is that Connect Parent Square, that CCISD Connect. And we had 84% strongly agree or agree with 16%. We have opportunities to improve. And so those are just kind of those mid-year metrics that we had from the survey on those 3 district goals. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I mean, first of all, I think these are fantastic results. I'm really happy to see these numbers, especially on questions. I don't think we've asked those last 2 questions before. Obviously not the Connect CCISD one because that's new. But for, I guess this probably wouldn't have been done, but maybe in future surveys, would it be possible to have, like for the people who disagree, some kind of way for them to, like for the people who agree, we can just move them on because we don't need them to tell us exactly what we're doing well. But for the ones who say they disagree, if there were maybe some choices they could say, or maybe even open comments, then we could start to see patterns in those. I think that might be useful information. Like we could start seeing, is there a common complaint that comes up a lot? And then if we do see those, are they things we can address? But overall, I'm really happy to see, especially on that second question, the 82% agreeing that they're getting effective behavior support. I think that's something that y'all have really made an effort with over the past year. And so seeing that as effective and hopefully adding to our retention is where we would ultimately see the effect of that, I think is a big deal. So
kids with that. If you don't mind, Ms. Hughes, would you mind just, we were talking about that this morning, and just some of those behavior, probably components that added to that score, just some of the things that have happened. And the main focus was elementary, and not that it's not secondary too, but some of the elementary.
And I think it applies district-wide too. We've definitely worked, certainly pre-K-8, but from the beginning, from the transportation to our new bus rules and bus systems and a full behavior system for our bus drivers and a incentive, so it starts from the very beginning, and then also the tier 1 and tier 2 supports that we have put in place. We've had a strong alignment in PL and team supporting that. And then I know we talked about safety committee about the alignment of our discipline matrix across the district and aligning those discipline practices, I think, have been supportive as well. So from the PL, but all the way to the doorstop of the bus stop, there have been different aspects that we've been trying to solve for. We still have work to do. Our most kids who are still experiencing big emotions, we're still working on those, and so that is that tie, but both the behavior side and the discipline side, we're making progress. So from the bus stop on.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes. Other comments or questions from the board?
Yeah. So the one thing on here that I was curious about, and to Trustee Bowen's question, I don't know if we know why, but the intermediate school staff, there's 84%, whereas the parents were 88% on the perception of the high quality education. Do we know why that number is low?
So going back to both your questions, we did have open-ended responses to some of these, and so my team has kind of broken those down and analyzed it by campus. We have not aggregated that to a district level because we were trying to focus on campus improvement. And so we'll go back and look at that, and I'll specifically look at the intermediate campuses.
Thanks. So what kind of information do you have that is the open-ended? Is that just from staff, or is that also from parents?
It was both. It was staff and parents, and it's just a lot of data to process.
Okay. Yeah, I would love this. Like once you kind of go through and you can categorize that a little bit, I think that would be really useful for us to have.
Yes, sir.
Go into that too. These are those just the metrics that we just got, but we can go back then at the end of the year and look at some of those, and that will give us some time to put some of that together, some of those big reoccurring items that are coming out. So that's definitely something we can do.
And for me, it just comes back to trying to make sure, what's going on with our staff and make sure if there's something going on that, it's great that the parents, feel perception wise, everything's great, but is there something internally, and breaking it down, you'll be able to figure out more, but, make sure the staff's taken care of.
Yes, sir.
Any other comments or questions from the board? I did just have one question. The total responses, do you know by chance how that compares to last year's or the last couple of years?
It was a little bit higher than last year's performance. About the same. They're all a little bit, but it was a little bit higher. I can pull up the exact numbers, but I can tell you it's higher.
I just was curious if it was anything substantial. I just didn't know if we had seen that.
Definitely more parents. We definitely had more parents. And every campus was represented. That was the other thing with this survey. And went back and looked, every campus had a parent voice.
That's awesome. Do we have, outside of our discussion in today's workshop, do we have a way to share these results back out? Do we plan to do that in any way back with the community that has taken time to provide feedback?
Yeah, and certainly at the end of the year, this is just kind of that keeping you updated on as we get these metrics, but we'll do an end of the year looking at all of our goals, and this will be part of that goal completion at the end of the year. So we'll put all of that together.
And I believe this is included in our community-based
accountability.
Yeah.
So that'll probably be added. Yeah.
We can include it. Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions, Thank you, Dr. Allen. We appreciate it.
very
Thank you for continuing to track this data. I think trustees' comments and what we know is that giving, whether it's staff or families, the chance to provide feedback gives us a chance to narrow our focus on specific things that they share with us, and I think is the only way we can ensure that we're focused on things that are otherwise disconnected with what the expectations are. So thank you for doing that.
Perfect.
Okay, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is our 2025-2026 budget goals, assumptions, and priorities.
Yeah, so each year the board meets to develop the goals, assumptions, and priorities that will drive the upcoming budget process. And the objective of this agenda item is to discuss the goals and priorities for the 25-26 fiscal year, which will be presented for approval at the March 25 board meeting at the end of this month.
Okay, thank you. So I put out a copy of the budget goals, assumptions, and priorities, and I've highlighted in yellow some areas that I have modified. But I wanted to just start. I'll go through each piece, and if you have any suggestions or changes that you'd like to make, feel free to let me know. So I'll start with the budget goal, which is the 25-26 budget will further CCISD's mission and strategic plan with financial integrity, maximizing benefits from available resources. I'm going to the next part I want to jump into, I kind of want to start at the end with budget challenges, because this is such an unusual year with some legislative, the legislation, and not kind of having two different, the House and Senate, two different versions. So down at the bottom, our budget challenges, of course, we've talked a lot about the student enrollment, with our funding being driven by student enrollment and attendance, and the situation we're in with declining enrollment. That always presents a challenge. Of course, when we build the budget, we build it based on our demographer's report. So if we go below that, then that could be a loss in funding we did not anticipate. We also have the inflationary impact of fuel, property and casualty insurance, and other commodities. I almost thought we could possibly take this off, but under our current environment with tariffs and uncertainty in that, I feel like it's something that we have to keep in and keep an eye on. Our inability to continue to recruit and retain quality staff, we actually added the continue to onto that. So that would, of course, be a challenge. And then the potential risk of sustainability of current programs in future budget years. The last two budget challenges, one of the things that with the current legislation is there's, both the House and Senate fund teacher compensation in two different ways. So it will have to be, we'll have to work together to figure out how that shakes out. One of the things that we think we'll see new funding in is in the special ed allotment in the state funding formula, and the legislation actually directs the commissioner of TEA to come up with a tiered level where there's payments are based on severity or services that the students receive. And so going into next budget year, we may not know how much that will provide. So it's a little bit of a risk in that we'll go into the budget year and really not know how much funds will be generated while this is under development, or it may be data we don't collect yet. And so that's just a risk that we'll have. So I suggest combining the last two budget challenges into one, which would be a budget challenge is the impact of school finance legislation that leads to inadequate revenue and requires spending on unfunded mandates. So are there any modifications or thoughts on those challenges?
So just kind of going through this list, a couple of things that I kind of want, before we get to those last two, just a little bit of wordsmithing. And I think some of this might have been in the previous one, but just kind of looking at it again, maybe the phrasing could change a little bit. For student enrollment, or ADA comes in below projections, I would just say might come in. We just don't know, I think.
Okay.
And that uncertainty is the challenge. inability to continue to recruit and retain quality staff, that to me seems like more of an effect of not being able to raise compensation as much. But I think it's looking, no matter what, like we are going to raise, we're going to raise, the state's going to make us, if nothing else. So, and also I don't want that, someone reading that to think that we're talking about the people we already have. Because in reality, I think we always are. Like, we're a destination district. We are going to be able to recruit high quality staff because that's what we've always done. And so I don't know that
I disagree.
yeah, well, what I'm saying is I don't think it. Something about that sentence, I don't want it to communicate that we think that anyone in the district is not adequate, you know, or that we would ever be hiring people who are not adequate. So maybe if we just said inability to, or maybe ability to compensate quality staff to the level they require, or competitive, or something like that, because I think that's really kind of what it gets at, right?
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of scenarios that we faced. Is we did much better this year, but being able to recruit bus drivers. There's a shortage in the market. You know, we have to just continue to modify our compensation or you know, recruitment of those. Speech paths right now is we're have a shortage in the market of those, and we're having to contract with them at a higher rate. So there are some pockets where we are really struggling to recruit certain
people, yeah.
certain groups of employees.
And I would say we need to keep it, when we look at it and when we compare not just salaries, but when we look at, you know, the amount of certified teachers that we have compared to some districts that struggle in that area. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about retaining and recruiting quality staff. You know, when you compare everything, but a lot of times people will just look at the salary and just be like, well, they're in the top 10 or they're in this or that. But when we're talking about experts in the field, basically we're talking about our certified teachers and things of that nature, teachers that have been with us 5+ years. You know, so that's what I think about when I read that sentence, and that's why I want to keep that in there, knowing that there is a shortage and knowing that that's a challenge to not only maintain, and these are some of the conversations I have when I'm at a ball game and I'm talking to a teacher and they share with me that they're thinking about leaving, and I'm like, they want to pump the brakes there, because you know that's not the only thing. Or look at the classroom management situation you could be walking into, etc. So, you know, those are some intangibles, but those are challenges, and those are things that I think that we need to be cognizant about. And so that's why I don't really think that we need to modify that. I think that that is good as it stands.
But what if we just said ability to continue instead of inability to? Because maybe right now it comes across like we feel like we're unable to, but I think we feel like we are able to right now because we're doing that, and we are hiring high quality people. So maybe that's a better way to phrase that.
I agree.
I'd like to add, if you looked at the human resources report, the separations, the vast majority of them were because of certification. So we are not, I mean, we are facing the same problems that every other school district is facing. And if you look at that report, certification. So it is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And so, I mean, it's definitely one worth keeping an eye on.
I do wonder, as we think about words, and I'm not sure, Alice, if this would be any better to the board, if we stated something around increased difficulty recruiting and retaining staff due to whether we say competitive compensation or compensation, because I think what we're describing is a challenging environment where compensation is a big piece of what makes that difficult, but it doesn't mean that the people we have are not the best people.
Right.
It just means that we're having a harder time in this environment without any adjustment with compensation. So I don't know. I just scribble that now, but maybe that's something we could look at if that.
Yeah, that's exactly my wavelength on that. Is communicating that if nothing changes, we could struggle to bring in to fill those spots without at the same time making it seem like we're not filling spots with quality people now, because we are. So, I think getting to these last two. The unfunded mandates thing is always difficult for me because I know that's an argument that we make a lot. I mean, every school district makes that argument. But I remember when I was newer on the board, I would always ask, can you give me a list of the unfunded mandates that are actually impacting us right now? And what is the dollar amount? And no one was ever able to give that to me. I don't know if we want to lean too heavily on that. I think there are a few instances of things that we can pretty clearly identify, but we've already found ways to adjust for those. Like the one that always comes to mind for me is having SLOs in every single school, and then the funding for that not being adequate to cover the expense of that. So I mean that's one, but for the most part, I don't really know that we have a lot of unfunded mandates put on us by the state that are not things we would be doing anyway, just in the coming and going of offering a quality education. So and unless we have, I guess, real numbers to back that up, I would say we probably shouldn't include that.
Comments or anything about that specifically?
Once again, I'm going to disagree. When we look at, funding for full day pre-K, and I'm sure there's some other programs out there that I can't think of off the top of my head, but that's one. You mentioned the SLOs. Once again, these are areas where we kind of separate ourselves from other districts because we're willing to put up the money to protect our kids. But the state, not so much. And just because we're willing to spend the money, those are funds that could be used for other things, but we think it's important enough that we're going to do that anyway. It would be nice to be reimbursed by the state, and there's a lot of things we've done in terms of cameras and other things to make sure our campuses are safe, that we were able to get grants and things of that nature. But I think of, Santa Fe and the extra monies that we put out for counselors and things like that weren't funded, but we did. And that's how we used our ESSER funds. But once again, it's just calling a pig. And there are unfunded mandates that the state has put out that we have continually over the years funded ourselves.
Well, I'm surprised they never got your list. They're pretty easy to find, EpiPens at all campuses. There wasn't any money given for that. A few years ago, you had to redo all your science labs. There was no money given for that. So every legislative session, these things come up, and we have to do it ourselves.
But you have to ask yourself the question, though. Is this something that we would not do unless the state was making us do it? Like, for instance, the SLOs are a great example. Would we not have 3 SLOs in high schools and 1 in middle schools and 1 in every other elementary school unless the state passed a law requiring that kind of coverage? No, we still would do that because that's our commitment to keeping kids safe. So EpiPens are another example. Would we not have EpiPens unless the state passed a law requiring us to have them? No, we would probably still have them. So an unfunded mandate is something that we would not be doing unless the state was telling us to do it. And then they were not giving us money to do it. So if we can identify things like that, then that can be part of our advocacy to either to say, A, give us the money to do this, or B, let us stop doing it. We don't think we need to be doing this. And so go back and repeal the law that is forcing us to do it. But I can't think of very many examples like that. Maybe the full day pre-K is a good example. We're funded for half day pre-K. Maybe if the state didn't require full day pre-K, we would still be doing half day pre-K. So that might be a good example of an unfunded mandate. But for the most part, I think what we're thinking of as unfunded mandates are really things we would be doing anyway that the state just happens to have a law requiring, and then they are things that we pay for. So I think the talking point and the reality don't necessarily align on that question.
Would it help to put potential new unfunded mandates?
Well,
there?
if there are things that we would not be doing unless the state required it. So, and again, if you think about something like HB2, or a Senate version of that, where there's additional funding, but some of that funding is earmarked for pay increases, right? That's not an unfunded mandate. That's just them requiring a certain amount to go to pay increases, which we always would do anyway. Every time that's happened in the past, the amount that we've spent on pay increases has exceeded the floor set by the state anyway. So that's not an unfunded mandate. That's just them setting a stipulation on additional funding that they're giving. So I would love to see a list of the things that, and I used to ask for this all the time and was never given a response.
So the SLOs where we only get $15,000 per campus is adequate?
If the state gave us zero, would we still, and didn't have a law requiring them, would we still have SLOs?
We didn't before.
Yes, we did.
No, we did not.
We have
Not to the amount that we have now since Santa Fe.
After Santa Fe we did that, but they didn't pass that law immediately after Santa Fe. That law went into effect last session, 4 years later. So I'm just saying that
because I think it's based off of legislators taking a look at what districts are doing or not doing. Scott.
Right, so we were already doing it, and they passed the law, and what we were already doing complied with the law they passed. So by the time the mandate existed, we were already doing the right thing. It's not something I think we need to belabor. I'm just saying that the unfunded mandates are a political talking point that we need to either have data to support or not talk about here.
I think I have another way of thinking about this. We are under effectively a cap in the, our tax rate is determined for us by the state. We are pushed to have a specific tax rate, and even if we want to deviate from that, the limits we can deviate from that are fairly narrow. So if this affects one school district, it affects all school districts. We have to compete against school districts who may or may not decide to fund these things on their own. So if the state requires anybody to do it, then that school should be compensated, and by extension, all schools, including us, should be compensated. So from a fairness perspective, I think perhaps we should track separately the things for our own internal purposes, the things that we would fund anyway and the things that we don't. But ultimately, if the state requires it and does not provide any money for it, if anybody should get any money for it, we should.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Any other comments?
I'll just
Mr. Shaw?
I think we leave it on here only because we know that it's something that we've faced in the past, and I think we anticipate for the future it will be a challenge. I was trying to look up HB3 from 2019 because I remember that bill having several unfunded mandates in there. And again, it's been 6 years. Those issues may not be there now. But I think with some research, between now and our, approval in the next 2 weeks, maybe we could all look at that and see what really is out there. Because off the top of my head, I know that I've had this conversation with legislators and in real time, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're right. We didn't think about that." So it does create a challenge to us, as a school district. So I would say we leave it in there, but let's get some additional information.
Yeah, it strikes me as highly inefficient. We have over 1,000 school districts in Texas, that each one of them should have to look this up. Isn't there a clearinghouse or some organization that keeps track of this for us, or should be?
There's a massive list that includes a whole lot of items. I haven't looked at it
So
in a long time, but some of it, yeah,
I've seen that list, and the problem with that list is it also has things on it that are like a mandate to teach advanced math, and that's not an unfunded mandate. That's what you get the funding for. Like a school district, and I mean, I'm making up that example, but it's a lot of things like that, where they are things that a good school district is going to do anyway. So yes, there's technically a mandate for it in the law, maybe somewhere, but we get bulk funding to cover those kinds of things. But the one that I really do agree with is the full day pre-K. I think we would, if left to our own devices, that is funded at a half day by the state, and so we would probably have a half day program if the state would let us, but they make us do a full day. So that makes sense as an unfunded mandate. But I think a lot of these others are just kind of things that any competent school district is going to do, even if the law didn't make them do it. So
I get your point about the SLOs, but I think we need to continue to push back on something like that. I mean, that law that they passed and the marginal amount that they offered up, it's an unfunded mandate. It really is. And I think it's just, a lot of people don't realize what that means. And it is something where we're informed about it. We can have those conversations with people. Last year people asked, why don't you have a SLO on every campus? And trying to go into explaining how we have it set up and, what we're paying for and why we're paying for it, and the money that the state was giving us wasn't, $80,000-$90,000, per SLO officer. So it's a reminder. It really is. So I say let's do some extra, homework. We can come up with a list. I think there's things in here with regards to, some of the teacher training that's required. When the teachers are, in those, professional development, or the state requires that additional training, are they paying for that extra time? If it requires a substitute teacher to be in the classroom and the teacher can't be in there. So is that considered an unfunded mandate as well? So the teacher is required to go to this training, we have to bring in a substitute. Who's paying for that? Well, we are. So it's a mandate, and now we're having to spend extra money to pay the substitute to come in, and that's just for one teacher, multiply it. So I think there's examples out there that we could probably look at. But
what I want to see is, this is the mandate. This is the mandate. We would not do this unless the state made us do it, and here's how much it costs. Like, that Excel file would be fantastic. Just, this is the mandate. We wouldn't do it, and this is why, and this is how much it costs. But if it's something we would do anyway, then the mandate, like whether a mandate exists or not, it doesn't really matter. And the problem with these allotments too is that we speak out of both sides of our mouth on this. Because on one side, we want the basic allotment to go up, and then on the other side, we say, well, you're not giving us enough money for SLOs. Well, okay, they can add to the SLO allotment, but that's just less money they're going to put in the basic allotment. So either way, we get the money, but they're praised if they do it over here, and they're criticized if they do it over here, and yet we're asking for them to do it over here. It's just, I don't know. We need to. I don't think we have a consistent message on this issue, and it would be nice if we just had a list of the programs that the state is making us do that we wouldn't do otherwise, and how much they cost.
Yeah, I guess something to consider is maybe just as a general statement is an inadequate funding model to cover quality public education. And so whether we deem something as unfunded or as a mandate, the things that distinguish school districts that will continue to thrive in an environment that doesn't have a formula funding that's addressed by the state is ultimately going to have to compete with private schools and charter schools, and it's going to continue to erode the very things that we are trying to provide to all of our students in our community and to our teachers and staff. And so I hear what you're saying, Mr. Bowen. I think the reality is that when we talk about an average daily allotment that hasn't been adjusted in multiple years, and we all know inflation, and we've talked about it in multiple meetings, whether you call it a mandate and we identify what those things are or not, it's a broken funding model that we've continued to do the right things, but doing the right things doesn't mean that we have an adequate funding model from the state to enable us to continue to do that. So I don't think us not having specific line items that call out things that our school district would do, but some wouldn't. In the case that you mentioned, if it's an advanced placement or an advanced course, the reality is those are things that we do to set our district apart, and we do it because we know that is what meets the community's expectation. And our ability to see that clearly doesn't absolve the state's decision makers from funding those things the way they should. And so not all school districts are CCISD, but at the end of the day, there are core elements that we know that I think we could agree have not been adjusted for inflation alone.
I would say the state's responsibility.
And so I think that's the challenge. And so calling out unfunded or not, the fact is that there are education providing funding, adequate funding to provide quality public education. I mean, then we can just say it more generally, and whether we call unfunded or not, that's just the fact. And the fact that we make decisions to bring in additional counselors because we know our students need it, and we get that feedback from teachers and staff and families, the fact that we provide additional services that go beyond what the state or the federal government provides, we know because of the feedback that we get, the fact that we provide programs that are competitive, highly competitive and sought after, that not all districts do, those are the things that are really required for quality public education. But it's not being funded at a base level, and so as a result, we end up having more challenging conversations amongst ourselves about how we do this.
Well, and the reality is that CCISD, if you look at the numbers, after all of the allotments and everything is taken into account, we receive less money per student than basically any other district in the state. We are caught in a vice because we are not property wealthy enough to be in the Robin Hood category, but we are not we're not a rural district or one of the big urban districts that get a lot of extra funding for the state. And I mean, this is something I talk about with legislators all the time, is that there's a huge unevenness to how education is funded in the state of Texas. And every time there's a big shakeup, most of the money goes toward rural schools and urban schools, and almost none of it goes to high-performing suburban districts like ours. And like that, I think that's a big problem. So the situation is not necessarily, I mean, you can make the argument that education is underfunded across the state of Texas, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but definitely our district compared to most other districts in Texas, is underfunded. And that's a situation that this current funding system created. And so I don't know how we go about rectifying that or even communicating it, but I think that's the reality.
I'll just to add one thing, I do like the inadequate funding model to provide a quality public education, because if you look at, I don't care if they give it to us in the basic allotment or the security allotment or the special ed allotment. I just want them to give it to us, to increase what they're giving to us. And I think that across the state, they're hearing that with special ed, and that's why we may not see this huge jump proposed for our basic allotment, but I'm anticipating we're going to see a very big bump, although I don't know how it's going to work with the special ed allotment, because that's where school districts, their numbers are going up. The services that we're having to provide are very expensive, and that's where a lot of costs are coming in at. So I think the unfunded mandate verbiage doesn't need to be there, but I think it sums it up very well just by saying if the current legislation, if what's proposed or goes through, does not provide, still provides inadequate funding, that's our risk.
I would love for this, and maybe there's a way to phrase this in there, that specifically call out that the funding model for Texas education disadvantages high-performing suburban districts like ours. Because it does. I mean, you can look at the numbers pretty much anywhere. I mean, per student, we are funded a couple thousand below the average district in Texas. And yet, we are able to stretch those dollars a lot further, I think, than pretty much anywhere. So, and maybe the way to look at that is that the state takes advantage of that fact. So,
Ms. Benzoff, I know we went straight down to the challenges at the bottom, but I don't want to miss the chance to talk about those items at the top that provide additional context.
So going up to the top, the budget assumptions, the first one is that we will manage our resources efficiently and effectively and identify ways to increase revenue and decrease expenditures to achieve a balanced budget. Now, I moved the year back because I can't, I'm very concerned about being able to balance a budget this year when I don't know what I'm working with. I won't know what I'm working with probably closer to late May, early June, when we can diagnose everything. And we're in our staffing meetings now. We are looking at proposed enrollment at our campuses. We've gone through our elementary campuses, and we are aligning our enrollment or our staffing with our enrollment. So we're making those decisions now. We can't wait because of contracts until May or June. But this is going to, once we get everything in and figure out what's going on, then we are going to have we'll have knowledge on what we're looking at for the next 2 years.
On this one real fast, because we have a balanced budget for this current year.
We have a balanced budget, but we're still bringing in funds from capital and contingency, around $5 million. So without that, we would not.
Yeah, okay, you're right. So,
However,
I was going to say return to a balanced budget, but if we're bringing over from capital contingency, then we probably
however,
don't want to say
budget and
that.
actuals are very different.
Yeah.
So if you look back at fiscal year 24, while we thought we would have a deficit, we had the fader, and we were able to actually have a surplus and build up our fund balance a bit. So
Maybe we do want to say, because after actuals, we were balanced in 23, 24, 24, 25 could turn out to be the same way. So should we maybe say return to a balanced budget by 26, 27, now that we've actually done it?
Okay, sure. The next item is to retain the 5% local homestead exemption and maximize our 8 enrichment pennies. We don't have an option with the 5% local homestead because we have to maintain that for, I think it's another 3 years. And of course, we wouldn't want to let go of the 8 enrichment penny. So We can leave that in there. And then incorporate any expenditure reduction, savings, and revenue enhancements. We're constantly, like I said, staffing is almost 90% of our budget. So that is what we're working on right now, is trying to be as efficient as we can with especially with our enrollment losses. We will use our realistic and defined ADA for the fiscal year with an expected enrollment loss of 317 students, and that's per our demographic study, and also utilizing our attendance rate that will come in for this year. We do, I'll leave in, but open to suggestions, meet budget requirements without accessing more than 20% of capital and contingency reserve funds, and then maintain an adequate general fund balance. Our policy defines that as 2 months. In board policy, currently we're at about a little more than that, at about 20%. So that's a good thing. Are there any other assumptions you'd like to modify? Okay. And then our budget priorities, these from year to year generally have stayed the same, providing optimal and targeted levels of funding and staffing for improved student achievement to meet our goals identified in our strategic plan. Of course, competitive salary, stipends, and benefits for all employees is always a priority. We want to continue to sufficiently fund our Safe and Secure program, including our student support and counseling services. Then I modified, I think this was said increase state revenues, but I changed it to maximize state revenues through continuation of our district initiatives that promote our student attendance. So that has worked very well over the past years, getting that attendance rate up. Implement initiatives to provide enrollment growth opportunities. So that will be via our open enrollment changes that we make, is trying to fill those classrooms that have available seats in them. Leveraging excess reserves and existing funds for financial support to meet current budget challenges. Reviewing efficiencies in programs and human capital to achieve any cost savings, and also explore facility utilizations efficiencies. Are there any modifications or additions?
Comments? Other suggestions? That's good.
All right.
Most of the attention then was on challenges.
So we
There's-
spent the time where we needed to spend the time.
Yeah.
All right.
With today's discussion, Ms. Benz, I would, just thinking procedurally, additional edits, then we could take a look at an upcoming Friday packet.
Yes.
And then if we have any other questions or modifications, then we could provide those.
Yes.
in advance.
that.
We do that this Friday.
Yes.
We'll do the edits. The other thing we can provide is that number that we've been talking about. We know the amount of money that, we really, the average that we spend, that we receive per student versus the state average, we probably could.
I did have one quick little thing. The user realistic and defined ADA for the fiscal year, assuming an enrollment loss of at least 317.
Okay.
We know that there's going to be 317. We don't know how far off with the others. So I would put at least.
Okay.
And then I don't know if we want to go back and look at what the demographer told us the last few years and see if we can back into a better number. That way we'll be better prepared.
Yeah, I can do that. He was actually very close this past year with his number, but I'll definitely go back and look at that.
Other comments or feedback?
Alice, just want to thank you for the work going on. I know whenever, whether it's policy or this, that, and the other, I know, Dr. Engel has mentioned that you're pulling your hair out just trying to keep all the numbers together. But thank you, and thank staff for what you guys do. So thank you.
Thank you. Will be a very challenging year, so I'm glad we spent time on the challenges because they are definitely there and right now. So.
Well, you handle uncertainty with a smile. That's good.
Not
That's the right attitude.
Anything else? Dr.
No.
Thank you to the board for comments and questions. Ms. Benz, I thank you. A lot of what we were able to talk about and the things that we're able to still accomplish from a district perspective are really grounded in having the resources and budget to do that. And so thank you to you and to the team that really help forecast and working with staff and campus administration just to make sure that we're doing all that we can. So thank you for that. If there were more people like you able to help advise and give feedback at the state level, I imagine we may be in a better place overall in the state of Texas. But unfortunately, that's also an exception. So thank you for doing that here for us. So with no further items before the board, I'll adjourn us at 5:31. Thank you.